Hey, what's up? It's me again. Hope you're doing good. We got a really cool video today, but before we start, I want to show you the sculpt that we did last time, all printed up and painted. This one was really fun to put together. I usually paint my models similar to how you paint Gundam kits, but this time I tried something a little bit different and I used the slap chop technique, which is more of a tabletop Warhammer technique, I guess. It ended up super grimy and I'm pretty happy with the result. So yeah, I just figured I'd show you my shiny new toy. The 3D printing files are available on the Patreon, and there's even a version where the top plate comes off and you can use the whole back compartment as a storage container, and if you want to put a plant or something in there, have fun with it. And enough chit chat, let's get down to business. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a long time, and you can probably guess from the instruction manual that you see on my screen, but it comes from a question that I often get, which is, how do I get better at mech design? How do I make things feel solid, functional, and believable, and look cool? The one thing I always recommend is build some Gundam kits. Because when you're actually assembling these things and like snapping the parts together, seeing how the joint works and how the armor layer connects, you start to understand the logic behind it. But here's the thing, even if you don't have the kits, you can still learn a lot from just looking at the instructions. Bandai posts a ton of these manuals online. They're out there for free, they're beautiful, and you can check them out. So for this video, I wanted to try something I haven't actually done before, but it's kind of how my brain is always working when I'm sculpting mech anyways, which is taking the instructions and kind of following them. I'll go through every step one by one, and I'll try to not just replicate what I see, but try to understand it. The idea is to use the manual as kind of framework, let it suggest the structure of the mech, and then kind of go off on that. The instructions tell you how the parts fit, but how you decide to actually sculpt it, that's where you get to have a lot of fun. This is what I'm using, and I got 2 pages. I tried to find something that wasn't too complicated. If you're gonna do this exercise, maybe don't choose a perfect grade Gundam kit, because there's about 1 million parts. You're better off using something simpler like a high grade. I'm also using my own personal kit bash set to save time on the joints. They're already inspired by Gundam kits, so might as well use them, you know. I'm starting with the torso, which is my usual go-to when I sculpt something from scratch. It gives you a good sense of the core block that's gonna make up your mech. It's where the pilot sits and where the head is attached, so that's a very central part of the design. But again, I'm not really looking for a perfect front, side, back breakdown here. I'm not going out of my way to track down extra views or like cross-reference model sheets. I'm just trying to make the choices that feel right for the design I'm doing. So if the instructions are a bit pixelated or low quality, it's really not that big of a deal. I want to make shapes that flow with the rest of the design. I'll even play with proportions and try to make stuff feel heavier in certain parts. I'm trying to inject my own taste into a Gundam design. But the instructions are super useful to understand all the chest piece part needs. A gray part, a orange part, and a black part. They're all about this size and they all kind of fit that way together. And once I have my chest plate figured out, I can just slap it on the torso and it should fit nicely on there. The same mentality can also be applied to the geometry. I'm not trying to make something super clean and very polished. I'm embracing the imperfection in my meshes, the janky voxel geometry. I use the artifacts that are created from the VR sculpting lagging as kind of a brushstroke or pen mark. I find it adds a lot of character to 3D modeling, which is often pretty stiff, and it's kind of like built-in wear and tear, you know. At this stage, I'm mostly looking at proportions, like how much space does each part take up in the torso. and I'm gonna save some detailing for later on. Next, I move on to the arms, but I don't have any guessing to do because the manual breaks down everything into clean sections. I'm just focusing on the layering and trying to figure out how these parts connect to each other. The shoulders are a pretty big statement, so I'm trying to design a shape that's fun to look at. I draw an interesting cross section which I just pull out to create more volume, and then I chop away at it and decorate it a little bit. I'm not going into super detail, but I still want to indicate some details for later on. I work loose, but I'm still very deliberate of where I make my marks and what shape I try to indicate. You can also notice I'm working on the whole arm isolated from the rest of the sculpt, but it's instanced on the torso. It's very useful to be able to work in and out of context on a piece. And whenever I create a new piece, rather than just stack primitives together, I like to use my clay tool as like a brush rather than just a stamp. I'm moving it around and I'm being very gestural with it, really trying to draw with the geometry. I'm using a hand from the Kit Bash set. I already sculpted it, right, so might as well reuse it. It's really helpful to have a big library of parts like that you can reuse for stuff that's repeating a lot. You can always modify and transform those parts to fit the project. I am working my way through the last piece of the arm, which is gonna connect everything together and kind of hide the joint connection, but I still want to make sure that stuff could connect properly. Since it's 3D, we can cheat a little bit. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but you know, let's aim for a good 95% accurate. Now moving on to the waist, which is the part that's gonna attach the legs to the torso. I go piece by piece like in the instructions, and I try to attach each part to the next one. I bring in a Kit Bash socket for attaching the waist to the rest of the mech that we sculpted, and I reuse a ball joint to attach the legs. And I know which joints to use where because I have detailed instructions. And then using a flat brush to block out a front and back skirt. Since the underlying structure and the connections are all figured out for me already, I can focus on making just a pleasing shape. And if ever the instructions don't cover something, I can just make it up. I can attach the waist back on the main body and see if stuff is clanking together. I take a look at my instructions for the next part, which is going to be the legs. And the same way I approach the arms, I'm going to start isolated, just a piece by itself. And then once I have a leg in place, I can put it back on the main body. I try to match the general shape that I see on the instructions, and then I try to work in my own shapes as well. Maybe you've seen me do this in other videos, but the way this kit is built is a dark metal underframe and then a lighter armored shell on top of it. That's really where it comes from. And it shows you exactly in what proportions do you need each element. But once the mech is assembled, I'm gonna change those proportions to fit what I think looks the best. So whenever I'm blocking out this leg, for example, isolated from the mech, I'm just trying to make the leg look as best as possible by itself. Because if each piece is amazing by itself, imagine how good it's gonna look when you put everything together, right? Usually not how it goes, but that's a problem for later. Now I'm just happy to reuse one of my Kit Bash parts for the hip joint. That way we can attach the leg to the waist. And all of that stuff we're doing of which part goes where is actually fundamentals. You've probably heard that term around on any art video ever, but basically what we're doing here is just anatomy for robots in a way that to me feels very fun and playful because you're just playing with toys. And you could apply the same anatomy concept to basically anything that's mechanical. I'm sure whatever you're trying to model, there's probably a kit with instructions somewhere. Maybe you can't find the instructions for free on the internet, but if you're able to physically buy it, I think the information is worth the price. And worst that can happen is you end up with a cool model to build. There's model kits for vehicles, ships, creature, architecture, whatever you're into. The same approach works across the board. You just have to break it down, understand how it's put together, and then build it back up your own way. That's why I recommend this exercise so often. It's because it teaches you how to see. And even if you were to take those instructions and model exactly what you see, it would still be a really good exercise, especially to get more familiar with the software or be more confident in the shapes that you make. I'm finished with the first page of the manual, so I'm switching to the next page. And we're going to continue working on the legs, adding some thickness to it. And while I work on the legs, one thing I'm often thinking about is how much articulation they feel like they should have versus how much bulk I want in the design. The bulkier your mech is, the less agility it's gonna have. And that implies also less movement. So it's always a balance between how heavy the leg looks and how stable it is versus how much it could actually move. So adding more mass to the sides of the leg might be a good option, so you're not restricting the movement towards the knee and the articulations. On this foot, for example, I see that it needs more clearance, so I'm not afraid to go back on my leg and then chop off the part that I need. Modify my design so that it's cohesive together. I want the whole mech to feel very heavy, so I make sure the joints are solid so that they feel like they can support the weight of the whole body. I think the legs are where a lot of the character of the mech comes through. Probably even more than people realize. The proportions, the joint placement, how much clearance you leave around the knees and hips, all of that starts to tell you about how this thing moves. Like, how agile is this mech? Is it meant to crouch and take sharp turns, or is it like slow and heavy, planted, super tanky, and just build to take a hit? We're now done with the legs. I can look at my little instructions, and now we're moving on to the backpack section. This is usually where the manual starts to introduce a bunch of cool attachments and extra stuff. You know, like boosters, fuel tanks, weapon racks, all the gear that sits on top, and all of that stuff is going to be attached to the core torso of the mech. Since the one we're making is based on the
HG コスミックエラー村雨海 STTF F400 コンパスモバイルスーツ
we're gonna go with some kind of wings with some missiles attached to them. The original design is transformable, but the model we're making is gonna end up as a static statue. So I'm not gonna obsess about the engineering of the transformation. Our purpose here is more to have an interesting silhouette, something that gives the mech a distinct read and just makes it look more badass. I'm also gonna build missile clusters under the wings, not so much for realism, but just to reinforce the idea that this mech has a purpose, so that even if it's static, it should feel like it's ready to deploy. Adding more details to certain areas, creating contrast between high and low detail density. That's another fundamental, which is composition. It's just that it's in VR and applied to a 3D object. We always think about composition in terms of a flat 2D surface, but if you're able to like shift your perception of it and apply all the things that you know about composition onto a 3D object, you'll realize that all the theory about rhythm, contrast, rule of thirds, and all that stuff it's still very valid. You're still guiding the viewer's eye through your piece. It's just that your piece is an object and not an image. I'm not really here to give you a lecture on art fundamentals, but the way I'm building these mechs, they're all kind of baked in. This is not a jab at any other art content creator, but I've never been a fan of just listing principles and be like, oh, the balance and the rhythm and the contrast and the negative space, the composition and the, you know. I'd rather demonstrate how everything is applied to a project and how do you balance all of them at once. Because it's not just a checklist of stuff that you need to do. You're trying to juggle with all these things at once. And I personally feel like it's much more informative to demonstrate all of that stuff by doing it. You still have to know all these principles, and if you want to know more about it, I'm gonna flash 3 books on screen. Pick up those 3 books, read through all of them, and you'll have a good base on a lot of art fundamentals. But we're not here to read books, right? This is for nerds. We're here to build cool Gundams. So here I'm attaching all the missiles to the wings, but I'm deviating a little bit from the manual. I just personally find that the way they're attached could be a little bit more interesting than what's provided in the instructions, and I'm just trying to create a cooler arrangement between all of those parts. So right here we kind of hit the end of the manual. I'm gonna start detailing stuff a bit more, and I also skipped the head, which was step 1 in the manual. I wanted to keep it for the very end so that I could make better design decisions, because if it was the first thing I attacked in the design, I wouldn't be in the same mindset that I am at this point, and it would inevitably be worse because I'd be rusty or just not warmed up. So that's why I usually design the head last, because it's such an important component of our character that I want it to be the coolest it can be. And as far as detailing goes, I'm freestyling here since we have a super good base with the very functional design that comes from the instructions. It's time to let loose and try as best as we can to improve on the original design by adjusting it to our personal taste. I'm going to be tweaking the proportions, the size of elements, the color distribution, stuff like that. We're officially off the rails and not following the manual anymore. Right after this head though, because we still need the manual for the head. So for the face, I'm going to try to create something that has a lot of personality. I'm going to exaggerate certain parts to make it meaner, just because I enjoy stuff that looks mean. And if I'm going to design a sick robot with a bunch of guns, I want it to look mean. And this is where the shape language really matters. Even small changes like the tilt of the visor or the spacing between the eyes, it can completely shift the personality that we're trying to give to our mech. I'm trying to break down even more what I see in the manual, because it shows us that the face is made out of maybe 5 or 6 parts, but in reality it's much more complex than that. So I'm pulling hints from the manual, like the proportion or the placement of the elements, but I'm letting my own creativity kind of guide the design. And since this mech is pretty fast because it's a transforming plane, right? I want to echo some of the speed into the design of the face, so I'm gonna go with like elongated parts, something pointy that kind of looks like a fin or like a jet wing. A sharper, more aggressive shape can make the whole mech feel more like a hunter, like a striker, and something that's more enclosed or protected, it feels more like a defensive build. This one should be fast and aggressive, so it's gonna be pointy and sharp with a lot of diagonal lines. We hit it with the classic Gundam V on the forehead. It helps a lot the silhouette of the head break away from the shoulder and the wings behind it. Like, even if it's a very busy design, it's a super recognizable shape. I'm trying to make the eyes area as aggressive as it can look. And then we can place the head on the body to see if it fits well and if it needs more clearance. If it does, you can adjust the size of stuff, move it around, make holes, make sure everything is connected together. And since we're able to keep the symmetry on the head, we can tilt it, making some last little adjustments to the face. And now that everything is blocked in, you can start scaling stuff to get better proportions, grouping everything together by sections, and just slowly tweaking the size of the elements in relation to each other. Even though I've been thinking about proportions from the beginning, now I can actually see how everything is playing together. Sometimes it means scaling the legs up a little, making them thicker, or pulling out the arm so it's wider, just nudging the torso so it has a better inclination with the body. I'm looking at the mech as a single composition now, not just a set of individual parts. If I make the whole top smaller, the legs are gonna feel bigger. This whole part is very subtle, but it's where everything kinda clicks together. And now that we have everything blocked in, we can start to pose it and detail everything. But first we need to establish a floor for our mech to stand on. It's gonna ground the mech, and it's where the design stops being a collection of shapes and just becomes a character. It adds a lot of context and weight and implies how the mech is interacting with the environment. I'm not going for a super dynamic pose or anything. It's more about getting the weight to feel believable. Once the mech is standing on something, it kind of shifts the way you read the whole design. You start thinking about how the feet are in contact with the ground, where the weight is sitting, how the upper body stacks above the hips. I'm also thinking about balance. Like if the backpack is heavy, I might shift the whole stance forward just to compensate. And the floor is super important here. It gives you something to compare against. Because if your mech is just floating, there's no reference point to where it's standing. But I'm also thinking about it in terms of a toy sitting on a surface, because I want it to look good once it's 3D printed and on my shelf. Once we have a cool pose, we can start introducing more gadgets and weapons. At this point, I'm not too sure exactly what weapon I'm gonna do, so I'm just playing with shapes, pulling out cylinders, thinking about doing a shield. But while I'm doing that, I'm constantly looking at the mech as a whole and judging how things are balanced together. So I'm never really finished posing the character. If something feels off, I'm gonna try to fix it. A big shield is gonna help balance the backpack a lot, because it's a huge chunky piece of metal. Also, having a shield and a weapon is gonna make the design a bit more asymmetrical. If your stuff is very symmetrical with like the weapons or the pose, it can feel less dynamic, which is not a bad thing. You just have to be conscious that's what you want. The position of the shield matters too. A shield mounted on the arm, it feels more mobile or like ready to attack. When mounted on the shoulders or the back, it reads more as a passive defense or like armor plating. And I'm detailing the shield as I go, trying to place it properly in the hand too, adding some trims around it to feel more visually interesting. And when it's a very long surface like that, I stretch a small section of the geometry rather than trying to freehand everything with a brush. It makes for a super straight and controlled line. I'm pretty happy with the overall shape and the details on the shield for now, so I'm gonna move in to the weapon. I'm thinking of doing a gun. Something like the classic Gundam rifle. But of course I'm gonna put my own little twist on it. Here I don't exactly know where I'm going with it, so I'm taking a little break to look at reference. And whenever I come back, I have a good idea in mind of what I'm doing. I could have pulled up a instruction manual for a Gundam gun, of course. But I know that I want the sideways foregrip. one that rotates around the axis for the barrel. You'll definitely recognize it if you've built a Gundam kit. I play around with the size of the barrel and I add a mag, which is a bit nonsensical because there's no ejection, all that stuff, so we'll just say that it's a battery and it shoots some lasers. Don't need to eject anything. Some people get really upset about gun design, and I guess they're just passionate, but it's okay, we're just building a cool Gundam. It's not NASA. It's fine that it looks a bit nonsensical because it's a cartoon. Let me build my fun little robots and go bother somebody else on the internet. Sometimes the stuff that is nonsensical is what is making the design the coolest. Like oversized barrels or like weird vents, cables running to places that don't really make sense. It's fine. The important thing is that it looks like it belongs to the mech. Like it fits the proportion and the attitude and the energy of the rest of the build. For example, here I'm adjusting the handle so that it fits the hand of the mech. That's important. That makes the design more believable. Here I try to play around with the shape that's around the arm because I like what it's adding to the design. So I try to work it in as a rocket launcher because why not? It's cool. And it helps balance the other arm a lot. I want both arms to feel like they're carrying kind of the same amount so that the mech is not tilting one way or the other. Also now it makes a lot more sense that our mech is carrying rockets on his back. He could use them to reload his cool rocket launcher. I try to work some rockets into the shoulders, but it ends up being looking a bit goofy, so I just keep him in the back. And then I adjust the position of the fingers so that it feels natural on the handle of the gun. Since it's coming from my kit bash set, it's already split up with all the fingers. Look, this guy is very thoughtful. He practices trigger discipline. Before I move to the final cleanup, I'm adding one more color to the armor. I'm still keeping the overall look pretty simple, like the lighter armor over the darker underframe, but I'm adding a second tone, which adds a little bit of sauce to our design. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna go with this monochromatic with a little bit of orange color scheme, but it would be really easy to change later on since everything is assigned correctly with the materials. Now I can start detailing everything, which is a pretty long process. I'm gonna be sharpening some edges and adding detail where it makes the most impact. At this stage, I'm not adding anything structurally. It's about reinforcing the design that's already there. So yes, maybe I'm gonna add some vents and some crazy reactors, but I'm not gonna add a new leg, for example. But you could if you wanted to. If you want this thing to be absolutely geared out, you could add stuff on the back and more weapons, more armor. At the end of the day, it's your design. You do whatever you want with it. Because this whole detailing section, you could spend an eternity on it and make it super detailed and crazy sharp. I'm also using the detail to manage visual density. Areas around the joints should get a little busier. Places where things need to flex and move. Flat armor section like the top of the shoulders or the wings, they stay cleaner. That contrast keeps the whole design from turning into just a bunch of noise. And you can make stuff up too, like, oh, there's a maintenance hatch here, or that's a cable to attach to the mech to a plane or something. But even then, it's not about overwhelming every surface. It's about creating a rhythm. Another art fundamental. But once you get into a groove and you're really focused and in the zone, this part is pretty meditative, honestly. You're just slowly adding stuff. And it's actually really fun to do, but it's pretty boring to narrate. At a certain point with detailing, it's less about what can you add, but more about when you stop adding stuff. You'll start to feel it, like you're not building up the design anymore, you're just layering more shit on top of it. And the strongest designs aren't the ones that have the most detail. Yes, detail is important, but they're the ones that every part, every shape, it feels intentional. And as you get deeper into the detailing pass, something that becomes important is consistency. You want every part to feel like it's detailed the same amount. That the smallest shapes on one part are the same size as the smallest shapes on another part, so that no part feels under or over detailed. Because if one part is super sharp and busy and the rest is like smooth and very simple, it's gonna feel disconnected. So as I work, I'm constantly zooming in and out, scanning across the whole design so that the level of detail is even. And when that's achieved, that's where you're done. It's easy to get impatient here and wanting to rush to rendering or feeling like it's good enough, but if you stick to it, it can really elevate your whole design. It goes from just a sketch to a final polished model. And honestly, it's one of the best part of sculpting. It's where you get to get loose and just scribble away. It's just you and your robot parts. There's no pressure, no big decisions, just focus and noodling. The thing about this whole process of building a mech from a set of instructions is that it teaches you a lot in ways that you can't really put in words. Like, it's really easy to get caught up into working the right way or finding the perfect reference or like the perfect proportions. But at some point you realize the real skill is learning how to make your own decisions when there's no perfect answer. You'll start to feel the structure. You'll start to know when a surface has to be sharp or soft, whenever you need more or less detail, and that sticks with you. You carry it from project to project. It's not just about finishing one piece, it's about getting better and having fun doing it, because if it's not fun, then what the fuck are we doing here? So hopefully you had fun watching this too. Maybe you try this exercise too, and next thing you know, you're a pro mech designer. It was really fun to design this way, and I'll probably introduce this in my professional workflow. Next time I have to design a forklift or something, I'll just pull up the instruction manual. As usual, in the upcoming weeks, we're gonna process this model to get 3D printed. Once it is, I'm gonna post about it on all my socials. And if you want to support me and the channel, or you just want to 3D print some cool mechs, well, you can head on over to the Patreon and then grab the STL files for yourself. I know I'm gonna be printing that one and painting it for sure. After doing work on the little truck from the last video, I have a pretty good grasp of what I'm gonna be doing for this one, and it should be really fun to do all the weathering and stuff. If you made it this far into the video, I want to say thank you, and I really appreciate your support. It's weird to say, but the comment sections on my YouTube videos are actually really nice, and I really enjoy interacting with you guys. It's usually super toxic, so I don't know what's happening. Maybe the channel is still small enough that we can fly under the radar, or maybe you guys are just really cool people. So feel free to leave a comment if there's something that you would like to see covered in the next video. Let me know if you tried this technique and if it works well for you. I'll post a nice turntable render from Keyshot at the end of the video. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!